Hey, everybody, this is Krane, and I am on the Nebula podcast.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We're live here. This is Eddie Barco with the Nebula Music Podcast, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited because I have somebody on the show who is very cool, and as you guys know, I only invite the people that I think are doing something really, really cool in the music industry, whether they're notable, up and coming, an entrepreneur, or just a musician, producer. But if they're doing something cool and different, I want to talk to them and pick their brain just for a little bit. Today, I'm excited because I have Krane, aka Zach, joining us on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm curious. Right before we were talking, you you mentioned that you wanted me to just to like continue talking normally to you as Zach, which I normally really do very well. But have you ever encountered any random musicians who like prefer to be, I guess, talked to as their artist name? You know what I'm
honestly,
talking about?
I've honestly not. I've never met anyone that's corrected me when I use their name. But I mean, it's always at first when you're meeting someone. First of all, I'm really bad with names. I'm also really bad with artist names. But when I meet someone and I do know their artist name and not their given name, it is a little bit awkward to say like, "Hey, what's up, so and so?" And then I'm never really sure how to ask the next question of, "So what's your real name, though?" Because I feel so uncomfortable just talking to someone and referring to them as their artist name. But anyway.
Yeah, I guess that is one of those awkward things when you're in the music scene. You know all the aliases, and then you got to meet up at some point, and you're like, "Oh yeah, you're a producer this," and then you find out their name is like Ben. You know, it's like a very simple name. Yeah, but anyways, I digress.
I've heard of you.
Yeah, well, Zach, my man, you are very talented. You do a lot of really cool stuff, which I want to get into. You were just letting me know that you were in Arizona for a little bit with your wife. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, and also kind of backtrack just a tiny bit because it's still very prevalent to this day, even though I'm grateful that it seems like this whole weird year that we've been in is coming to an end. I am genuinely curious how you've been handling it. I know a lot of musicians and producers have been handling it very differently, some good, some bad, some creative, some not. How have you been this whole past weirdness of a year?
Yeah, I mean, God, it's
been a year, man. That's not fucking crazy.
I know. So I had my second birthday during COVID times.
Well, happy birthday. Happy April. 2 birthdays.
Thank you. And that's when it kind of struck me how long this has been going on for. Because I think it just really normalized for me and I just settled in. And then when the second birthday came around, it was just like this marker where I could look back a straight year and just be a little blown away that this has been going on. But I mean, honestly, for me, there's definitely been challenges, but on the scope of things, I can't complain too much. And I feel pretty grateful, especially as I've seen other people in my family and community just struggle a lot harder. So yeah, I mean, it's been all right. Certainly as far as music goes, there's been some ups and downs. I think initially, I feel like it gave me a whole lot of space and room to just experiment and work on music as much as I wanted, which was wonderful. But definitely as time went on, I think the social isolation, the lack of being able to get into studios with people, shows, things like that, has slowly kind of started sapping my motivation and inspiration a little bit. But I mean, yeah, I'm not one to like look back too much, I guess. And so I kind of have to pause when I get asked that question. I think it's definitely been noticeable as things have been opening up and I've gotten vaccinated and it's starting to feel really nice. So that makes me think, okay, maybe it has been a little bit more of a struggle than I realized, or I haven't been so in touch with my feelings or something like that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's gotten to a point where there's just a little bit of laziness or apathy, I think, that it's injected that I'm really looking forward to just getting over. When it started, I felt like I was super motivated to just find workarounds and churn out music. I was taking lots of little trips and, kind of taking advantage of what I could. And then I think I've just kind of gotten a little lazy with that. So
I think a lot of us have gotten kind of lazy with that. I remember, I feel like I was in the same boat and a lot of people were too. I'm wondering for you, did this bring up any random here's kind of where I'm coming from. I know that as you were talking about, when you're in the hustle of it all, when everything's normal, you kind of have a lot of things over you that keep you in check, whether we know it or not, right? But once all that got taken away, I noticed it for me specifically, like very much like you, my motivation was there. And then within like, once I really knew that we were in this, like maybe May last year, I, for whatever reason, just didn't want to do shit for like months because it just felt so weird. And I learned a lot of things about myself. And I think a lot of people did too. But I'm wondering for you, do you feel like this year taught you anything that otherwise you would not have learned? And maybe you didn't want to know it. I don't know. But I'm randomly curious.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind was, I definitely have considered myself prior to COVID to be a pretty social person, definitely extroverted and, pretty connected to my friend community. And I think I was surprised by how quickly I let that slip during COVID. I mean, first of all, I'm at that age where, some of my closest friends have started families. And so, that was already a barrier to getting to see my community as much as I might have. And then on top of that, with the COVID thing, I certainly couldn't see them at all. And I guess, I was surprised at how kind of easily I let that go and would go weeks without seeing any friends or anyone except for my wife who I live with, obviously. And that was something I had to actually be conscious and reach out to people and not just keep going with the flow.
Yeah. Where do you live, if you don't mind me asking?
Oakland, California.
You live in Oakland. So you're still up in the Bay Area.
Yep.
Because that's where you're from, right?
Yeah. Grew up south of here in a place called Portola Valley. Went up to Washington State and Seattle for school, but came back to Oakland.
Interesting. My old college roommate was from Castro Valley. I'm not sure if you know where that's at.
I do.
But
not too far.
Not too far from there. Well, what's interesting about what you were saying was how, and I bring it up because I'm in LA, in Southern California. For those of you guys who aren't from here, Southern California, LA, San Diego, that whole area. Here, it's very, even though I love being from here, I do admit that it can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It can be very fake sometimes. I guess that's what I would say. And in being out and about, you know everybody, but then like when this year hit, it really made you realize that you have to put an effort into actually reaching out to people. And for me, I just feel like my circle has gotten so small, not by choice or, no one did anything wrong. It's just this year just kind of changed that. But I also feel like that's a good thing. I feel like creatively, it's put me in a very different spot to where I used to be. For you, do you foresee a lot of that circle coming back, or do you find it like it's a more permanent?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, to touch upon music, I guess this is a music podcast and I am a producer. So, over the last year with shows going away and with the, not being in the studio and being as in person, I guess, with music and having that feedback, I definitely saw the kinds of music I was making change a lot. And, way less inspired and motivated to make really energetic club music, things like that, and more focused on, more, I guess you could call it headphone music, or just things that I never had to put through that kind of mental filter of like, is this DJable? Is this something I could see in someone's set? And so, that kind of, I just stopped thinking that way. So I think the music that I made for my project became a lot more laid back and I guess eclectic, as well as, some side projects that I got going, one of which is out there and one's coming out as soon as I get all the songs together. And it just, I guess the last year gave me the opportunity to just think about music without that filter of, are people going to want to hear this out live, or are people going to want to put this in their mixes and their sets? And that was actually a pretty liberating feeling.
I love that. When you say eclectic, what do you mean? Just because, like you were saying, you are a producer and you're a very successful and very notable guy too, who's been around for a while and you've done a lot of really cool things. But I do find that in the industry, that is something that you usually have to think about. Is this thing I'm working on, is it sellable? Like, can it actually make money or whatever? And this year was the first time where I feel like that didn't matter at all. Because there was no live performances and stuff. So it did give a lot of people opportunity to explore otherwise. So I'm curious, now that those restrictions were lifted for you for about a year or so, and you mentioned how your music got a little more eclectic, I'm wondering, like, what does that mean for you specifically? Like, where did your music end up going now that those restrictions were somewhat lifted to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a challenge for me to describe music, and especially my own music. I guess
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that it mellowed out, and
Mm.
it, I got to focus more on, I guess, songwriting versus what is the energy and the sound design specifically. I think, when you're making EDM, especially trap music, so much of it is all these little elements that I think even the audience don't even notice that contribute to this feeling of energy or crescendo. Um, and the
Mm.
sound design, especially finding new ways to translate a melody into something that really catches your ears. Um, it's not something that can just be like formulaic, I guess, because especially with trap music being kind of minimal. So where was I going with this?
You were mentioning the nuances, how a lot of electronic music, you have to worry about the nuances to make sure
Yeah,
that
I think those
that
were
like
things that when I stopped thinking about those and started making more music, it reshifted my focus towards, percussion and layering and I guess moods that I didn't really get to explore that much. Maybe things that are a little bit sadder or things that are more
ooh.
chilled out or relaxing or pretty. Um, but again, like I look back and I can describe kind of what happened somewhat, when I talk about like how my music changed during this year. But during the actual process of it, like I'm not conscious of that. I'm not strategic. I'm not thinking about that while I'm making. It's just kind of a natural outgrowth or a natural process. And then I kind of
Mm.
look back over the last 6 months and I talk to people like you and I say, oh, okay, well, this is actually pretty different. Why did that happen? And try to figure it out. So I think somewhat I don't really know why
Hmm.
why things change until I have these conversations because I'm just making music, daily and just going along and doing what feels natural.
Yeah, it's a good thing that you don't have to think about it because otherwise, I mean, I'm a huge proponent that if you overthink something, it's just not going to come out right. I'm kind of interested in this topic a little bit because you are right. I do feel, and this isn't just the case with EDM music. I know that you are in EDM, but I feel like you kind of cross a lot of genres where you're in more than just that. But you did mention like trap, EDM. A lot of those genres can be very specific, especially with what people like. And you did start mentioning the little nuances, like how something is supposed to feel. And I'm wondering if we can get a little more detailed as to what you mean by like the little nuances. I know trap, everyone thinks of 808s and they think of like the little hi-hats and stuff.
Yeah.
But overall, in your experience, when it comes to like what some people would call a banger, like if there's a really good drop or something that people really like, in your experience, what were some of those elements? And then maybe we can figure out what are some of the new elements that you have uncovered with this new year that you're kind of working on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does. I mean, with trap music, again, like I'll talk about it in general terms, but there's so many exceptions to I think these points. So it's not like a hard and fast rule, but it's easy to put down like a simple kick snare trap beat with, some hi-hats with little 30-second note fills or whatever. Put an
Of
808
course.
on it and then, copy whatever is like a trendy melody or lead sound right now. But what really separates, I think, trap music that's super interesting and winds up being more successful are things that are a little bit more subtle. So in those elements, for example, like how is the side chaining working? How is the kick and the
Mm.
how are they delayed or adjacent to each other? What is the actual sound design of that kick that makes it unique, as well as the snare? And so that the mixing is really important. I think with the when you have less elements and everyone's sort of making the same kind of songs, it's more subtle things that I think separate out your song. And then that melody I think is often a chance to try to, and I call it a melody, but oftentimes it's pretty amelodic. It's a chance to try to put a trap beat behind a new sound. Um,
Mm.
Try to, and sometimes it is just a sound, but it becomes melodic, or people start thinking of it as a lead. But it's the opportunity to introduce what is some new melody, what is some new sonic element that people haven't heard as the forefront of a song that somehow fits because you have a really strong trap groove behind it. And then beyond that, there's all these tiny details I think that separate out really interesting trap music from just kind of run to know what anyone else can do when they sit down and just, make their first trap beat, which are like atmospheric things, things in the background, percussive elements,
Mm.
things that, again, I talk a lot about elements that like an average listener won't even necessarily pick up on or notice unless it's pointed out.
Yeah.
But the culmination of all those little subtle details actually make something really special and make the song what it is.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of the stuff that I've done. Like, for example, I'm a drummer, right? I was a drummer for a very long time, producer now, but one of the things that I remember that really starts to separate what drummers do, which I think you might be aware of this because you are a musician as well, which we can get into in a little bit. But one of the things that drummers pick up on is something called ghost notes,
Yeah.
which it's for those of you who might not know what they are. That's essentially when you are playing very quietly over a beat that you have. So if you have a normal rock beat, in between all the major hits that you normally would hear, there's these tiny, like really quiet notes that you're playing that add, like, it makes the groove feel like it's moving along better. But you can't really hear that unless it's only the drums playing, or like you know what to look for. And I
Yeah.
imagine with trap music, there's a lot of that tiny little minute sounds that you could probably hear if you were trying to find them. But if you just wanted to pick them out of nowhere, you probably wouldn't hear them at all.
100%. And similar, it's funny, actually, I started during COVID taking Zoom drum lessons and got a drum.
Hey, awesome, man.
And it's funny. I mean, it's exactly that. That's like the perfect metaphor where it's these little elements that, one, are really difficult to play and really difficult in production to get right. It's almost like a second beat behind your beat. And
Yeah.
if you're listening to a song to someone that doesn't have, an ear for it, doesn't produce or have a musical background, it's really hard to point them out to people. But if you take out all those things, it definitely depreciates the audience's experience of it. I mean, you take out all those
Yeah.
in a beat, especially you think of like a halftime shuffle, right? Like if you took out those ghost notes, people wouldn't like it nearly as much. But if you ask them, like, what was the thing I took out, it would be really hard to describe it because they are really subtle.
Yeah, that's crazy that you actually understand that, because I have so many of these conversations and most people aren't drummers, which is odd, because I know so many drummers, but not many of them transition over to production side or whatever. But I'm wondering, just out of curiosity, how hard is it for you to learn drums, by the way? I'm not sure if you were playing before, but I know you're taking lessons now. How hard is it for you to pick it up?
I definitely have a leg up. So I grew up playing bass and guitar, and then you go through production.
Awesome. Hell yeah.
But my brother grew up playing drums. So we always had a drum kit in the house. And even though he wouldn't let me play it, when he was gone, I'd run into the garage and play it as much as I could till he got home. And then, I grew up playing in some jazz ensembles, and, one of my best friends is a drummer. So I always kind of jammed on it, but I never actually formally sat down and learned proper drum playing, which I'm not sure why it took me so long to do that. But finally, during COVID, I got a drum kit. I found a teacher, and I'm actually learning it properly. And it's a whole different thing. I definitely have a leg up, but I also run into the problem that because of my background as a musician, my ear is so much farther ahead than my limbs.
Yes, I know that feeling. I know that. You know what's funny? I'm the opposite way, where I tried learning how to play bass. I mean, I kind of know how to play bass now a little bit just by default because I'm also a piano player. So it's one of those frustrating things where, because I've played drums and piano for so long, I theoretically sort of know how the bass should sound, especially with like slaps and all the little nuances when you mute the notes. But my fingers can't fucking keep up. They're so slow. They start to trip over themselves. And it's so frustrating because you know where you want to go. You just can't fucking go there. And it's the worst feeling in my opinion. But I don't know if that's how you feel with drums sometimes. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, completely. I'll be playing something and I hear exactly what I want to happen. Especially if we're talking about little fills and things like that. And then I go to do it and suddenly I have to slow it down, like 50 BPM, and then it does just sound the same. So but anyway, it's fun having a project though. It reminds me of when I started learning to produce a lot, in that I get so addicted to the process of actually learning it step by step. And drums are especially rewarding because the feedback is so fast in the early portion. you progress, I think, a lot faster than maybe some other instruments. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, so it's been awesome.
Yeah, drums is one of the hardest ones to master, though. I would argue that because I do
I
think
agree.
that, yeah, I would say that like you were saying, the instant gratification is definitely there. Like you can learn how to play a rock beat in an hour, and then you can sound like a lot of the records that most people grew up listening to. But in order to learn all those little nuances, takes fucking years. But I'm
Yeah.
wondering when it comes to a lot of the producing stuff that you've done before, because you've done a lot of revolutionary things, like sampling and things that a lot of people use these days, and you mentioned very briefly, but I do think it's kind of important because I've heard this with many different people, and I'm wondering what you think, that there is this reward when you're first learning something, when you're first chasing, I don't know what you would call it, but you have something that interests you and you're chasing after it, and every day is kind of new. You're figuring things out. Producing can be like that, but I do feel, in my experience, for example, there's a lot of plateaus along the way, especially after you kind of know what you're doing. There's a lot of plateaus and you kind of have to fight to get over them. Do you ever encounter those plateaus, especially someone as experiencing you as you, who's been around for a while? I would imagine you've encountered plateaus, but I don't know if you have. And I'm wondering how you handle those if you have.
I mean, plateaus or blocks or just kind of getting into a rut where you feel like the things that you're making are not matching your expectations for yourself happens for me in a small way every week, in a, kind of medium to large way every month. And then definitely like a couple times a year, there's a period of just total failure and totally sucking and just going through a little period of hating everything that I make. I think in the early days when I started out and it was just like a fun project and I was not taking it seriously, I probably still had those times, but I didn't know they were happening because I couldn't tell that I sucked because it was so exciting. It was so amazing.
Yeah.
Like making music and your ear is actually way behind. It's like the inverse of what we were talking about with drumming. Like,
Yeah.
for some reason, just making any sound was so amazing to me that I thought it was just awesome. And I was showing friends. And then as you get better and your ear gets better, you're like, oh man, that stuff was really terrible. So as soon as I think I developed the ear for production and actually what good production should sound like, I forced myself to get very comfortable with, I guess, sucking, with feeling like my music sucks and still having fun with it and still kind of loving it as a hobby, as a job, as a, thing I do every day. And yeah, it definitely, I feel like it gets worse for me as time goes on because my standards start going up. And sometimes it can just be super paralyzing where I feel like the expectations I have for anything I want to put out are so far beyond what I'm making that, it kind of keeps me from releasing, or it keeps me from finishing songs that, maybe months ago I thought were really amazing, or maybe they are amazing and my audience would love them. But for some reason, I can't get over the fact that they're not meeting expectations. So to kind of go back to your question of like, what do you do in those moments or periods of time? I think there's just nothing. I don't know. I wish I had an answer because what do I get frustrated. I get stressed out. It kind of seeps into my outside of work life for sure, where I definitely feel antsy and like not totally fulfilled. But every single time I just try to remind myself, I guess this is the one thing I do, is just look back and realize every single time it's gone away, it's passed. Every single time I've either just through accident or from some effort kind of leveled up or pushed through, or something just happens.
Yeah.
And then it goes away. And so I think the trick is actually not to avoid it. And the trick is not to force it to go away. The trick is just to get through it as calmly as possible. So that
Coexist with it maybe a little bit.
Yeah, because it does. It just, if you keep working, it just goes away either on its own or like you accidentally make something you get really excited about. I mean, usually that's how it works for me. Or it's just a mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, I respect your opinion because, again, I do feel like when I listen to your repertoire and I listen to a lot of the things that you've done, to me, a lot of them stand out, even though many of us, even people who aren't really into music, understand what trap is nowadays and they understand what EDM is. There's all these expectations by the mainstream media about how it should sound, right? And as a producer, someone who understands the process, it can be very debilitating when you are just not in the zone. And I'm very lucky and blessed that I get an opportunity to talk to people like you and other people who have different ways of basically achieving the same thing. One person comes to mind. You ever listen to or ever work with Spaghetti or
No,
Spaghetti? No,
no.
really cool dude, drummer as well. He's a drummer too. And he basically describes the same thing that you were talking about. And for him, and I'm wondering if you relate to, I don't know if you do, but he basically describes this point where, you get to a point where everyone kind of knows your stuff. Like they recognize you as a success or someone who's done, achieved all this stuff. And now all of a sudden, that's what's expected of you from now on. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can act as a plateau. Maybe not necessarily you or coming from you, but now all of a sudden you've got this thing of like, well, I'm known as the guy who makes trap, or I'm known as the guy who makes dubstep, or I'm known as the guy who does this, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you got to find a way not only to break through your own plateaus, but to break through that and face that choice. Do you just give people what they want or can I do something new? So you're in this
Totally.
interesting position where because of COVID, you, in my opinion, sounds like you've tried something brand new. And I think I was asking you earlier about those little nuances that you have come up with or have kind of maneuvered to. What are some of those new places that you see yourself going to? And do you ever find yourself in that position where you like get intimidated by what is expected of you? I guess I could say. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that, but I don't know. I'm wondering.
No, totally. And I think now, thankfully, I feel a lot less the pressure of like people's expectations about what your next record or releases will sound like or what your genre is or your style. And, the pressure to kind of conform or like slowly evolve from there. I definitely can point to times, especially probably a couple of years ago where that was super on my mind and to the detriment of probably my music. Cause I think as soon as you start, pre-thinking when you're working about someone else's expectations of what your music should be or prejudging it, it's way less fun and it's way less inspired. And it's also further away from probably the things that initially got you that audience to begin with. I think for me personally, like my music was always been partially on accident, eclectic or weird, or it sounded unique just because I wasn't steeped in this style. I didn't grow up listening to EDM. I got into it really, really late. So kind of by
How old
accident.
were you when you got into it, by the way? How old were you when you got into it?
Like 28 or something. I mean, like I feel like I haven't been around that long, but again, my getting into production dovetails 100% with getting into EDM. I didn't like grow up going to shows and seeing people and like listening and fanning out and then say, oh man, like I want to try to do this. It was totally actually the inverse, where I got into production as a hobby and that opened me up to electronic music right at the same time, obviously. And then I started seeing what was going on out in the world. So I didn't have that background. And I think I felt really free of all those expectations you're talking about and free of feeling like either, pressure to meet some style or sound or pressure to like break away from it. I just never even thought about it. And then as I got a little bit more established and started seeing a little bit more attention and success, then I started feeling that. Recently, especially with COVID, I don't know a better way to put it other than I just stopped caring. And
Which is good. That's a good thing.
Well, I mean, it's good and bad. I think it depends on what your goals are. If you're some very mainstream DJ kind of producer person and you want to just kind of keep on the festival circuit and whatever, like maybe you should really pay attention to what your audience expects and just keep feeding them if it's working and that's how you want to be. I think for me, when I started actually feeling pressure to be that way, I made worse music because it wasn't as fun and it wasn't as weird. And so I think the reasons I started getting attention were for for those elements that were just really unique and original. And so it was almost like, well, why I need to get back to that. Why am I trying to fit in or conform to people's expectations when the whole reason they started listening to me was like, music I was making when I wasn't doing that.
Yeah. Do you find yourself that you naturally rebel to that when you feel those expectations starting to creep up? Do you find yourself that musically and creatively you instinctively just like rebel and just like backtrack on purpose?
Yeah.
Or maybe by accident? I don't know.
I mean, I don't know if I'd call it rebel, but I think you got to pay attention to like what feels fun and what makes you happy. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but you're going to make better music if you're feeling fulfilled and enjoying the process. And I think for me, as soon as I feel like there's expectations of me when I'm working to meet them or when I'm working to fit in with the other EDM trap producers or whatever, then it doesn't feel as fun and it's not as enjoyable. And the whole point of working in music is to enjoy,
to have fun. Yeah.
I mean, maybe fun is kind of a bad word because it sounds kind of like flippant, but it's to enjoy your job in the way that you enjoy life outside of work. And as someone that's kind of worked in a career in a 9 to 5 most of my professional life, like if this is not fun and enjoyable, then why did I leave a more stable, secure, reliable career to do this?
Yeah. Yeah. That is very well put. What were you doing before, if I can ask?
I was working in tech. I was working, I went to school for product design.
No way.
So yeah, I was consulting with companies and I'm bored talking about it.
It sounds like it could be boring. I was in the fashion industry, believe it or not.
That sounds more fun.
You know what? You would imagine it is.
I am.
But it can be very, it's very, what's the word? It's very picky, if I can be honest with you. And so I'm glad that I'm not involved with it as much as I used to be. But what's interesting about what you've been talking about, and I want to explore a little bit of this area, is you come from this background where, like you said earlier, you didn't grow up going to the shows or that whole entire process. Neither did I, by the way. I grew up in the singer, songwriter, drummer scene. Like I played for a lot of bands and a lot of those kinds of artists. And then one day I got introduced to electronic music and made the transition, if you will. You seem to have found it by accident by, going through the whole process. That makes me curious then of how you approach songwriting, because it is very different. Yeah. And I would argue your music, even though I feel like you can put a genre over it, it does stand out. Yeah. And I think we can attribute it to the fact that the way you approach it is not the same as everyone else would. No. So I'm wondering specifically, when you sit down to write a song or to write a new, I don't know, whatever, what comes to mind? At least when you've created some of the best work, what was going through your mind as you were working on this stuff? Yeah,
I mean, well, first of all, there's kind of every process is represented, I think, in my record. So when I talk about this particular process that is my default or has been how I've made a lot of the songs that I think people know me for, it's by no means like this is how you should do it and this is how I always do it. But it's sort of like a bit of chaos and, kind of sketching and not really having an idea of where I'm going. And then ideas kind of emerge, I guess. So it's a very like emergent process. I remember reading about super early on about Flying Lotus and how he achieved some of the really interesting sample based music that he's made, especially his earlier stuff. And he talked about how he would just drop samples in just without thinking, just random stuff and layering it and pushing it around, and then something would come out of it that was unexpected. And so I think I took that to heart early on. And again, music was just for fun for me. So I wasn't going in with this mindset of like, oh, I need to make this 140 BPM style of stuff or whatever. I would just sit down and have fun. And so I think a lot of my music started out with a lot of sampling, sketching, weird stuff on synths and keys, dropping in drum sounds, and just something would catch my ears. I would perk up and then start building it out an idea from there. But it was really mindless, I guess. And I think that was the whole point is, like I have a song, Movin', for example, and it's got, I think of all my songs, one of the more recognizable little chopped up sample based kind of intros that it just became very recognizable. Not to like toot my own horn or brag. I just mean to point that out as like, that's a song I can point to that was very unique, identifiably me and my sound. And I haven't really heard anyone else kind of sound like that, even though there's elements in there that are very kind of mainstream EDM. It's got something that makes it very, very different, which I guess I'm a little bit proud about. But that came, I think that song started on the bus ride to my job. And I remember just dropping in samples and layering weird sounds and like old soul songs and stuff like that. And then I'd go in and I'd chop it up and pitch things and stretch them and just really collage them until something just emerged. Because I even though I grew up playing music, I don't have a strong base in theory. And I don't like the nice, tidy sounds you get from MIDI and software synths and things like that. So yeah, I guess that's how I'd best describe it. It's like collaging.
Interesting. I love that. And I love that you kind of, you approach it in a way where, and this sounds pretty fucking generic, but I do find that it is true across the board that, I mean, would you say that if you hear a sound in your head, kind of like we were talking about with drums and stuff, is it usually something that you can pinpoint to an actual instrument and then you try and like find the right sample for it? Or is it usually just like a random weird ass sound in your head and then you're like, all right, let me see what this sounds like? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd say it's more the second, and it's less even a sound, but like it's a really difficult thing to put to words. It's a feeling. It's a little bit of an emotion. It's a little bit of a feeling. It's a little bit of a sound design element in there. It's just a very amorphous, abstract shape in my head that I'll go after. And then I would say 9 times out of 10, through the process of trying to achieve whatever that initial spark was in my head, something completely different comes out of it. And I think the key is to be flexible when you're trying to come up with ideas, to go with that and just say save as, and maybe you'll come back and like keep hammering away trying to like translate that amorphous feeling you had, but don't let that obstruct some other idea from coming up. And I think that's really important for me is, I'll have a project file and Ableton saves it into a folder. And then within that project, there's like 5 more projects and new names for all of them, which is a total headache when you're trying to go back and find that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
One. But yeah, I think that's key. And the more I talk about it, like I feel like we talked about like creative ruts, and I've been in one for like a week or two right now. And the more I talk about it now with you, the more I'm like, oh yeah, I just need to go back and do that and like go have fun and play around and not take it so seriously.
I'm glad that this conversation is helping you to remind that. Yeah. I'm curious what you think about this. I interviewed Aaron from Intervals, which is a really cool band. Or he's an instrumentalist, but he's a brilliant guitarist who I think you would really dig. He mentioned how sometimes during his creative ruts, he's gotten to a point in his life where he just accepts them, kind of like you a little bit. But what he does is he argues that in his opinion, he never really pushes his creativity when he feels in a rut. What he uses that time for is he uses that time to like organize. And you know how sometimes as producers, you just have thousands of samples and whenever you need them, you can't fucking find them. He's like, whenever I'm not creative, that's the time that I organize everything. I work on everything else. And there are moments where the creativity just hits me. And that's when I go. Otherwise, I don't worry about it. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know if you feel like that.
I think that's an awesome idea, especially as, I think as being a producer, making music, unfortunately, is just one facet of the job description. And I wish it was the thing I could just focus on all the time. But there's a lot of administrative stuff. And now there's now I sound so old when I say now there's social media, even though most of my audience have always had social media. But like that's an important part of the job and all that other stuff. And I guess the thing I would add that I realized I've super missed over the last year is getting in the studio with other people creates one, like a pressure situation where it doesn't matter if you're in a creative rut, like you need to make something happen. And then 2, it's just as an extrovert and a social person, and, that being so important, I think, in music, because again, like I grew up playing music with other people and it was always like a social thing. It was not lock myself in a dark room and come up with something on the guitar. It was being around other people, having a conversation, whether that's like through producing or just talking. I miss that a lot. And that was definitely something that kept the creative process flowing for me.
Yeah, that's actually a relatively new thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think music in general, when you think about a lot of the legends of the past, they all describe moments where they were just hanging out with other musicians and future legends and stuff like that. I think it's a very I never thought of it that way. I never realized that the whole concept of working from your computer and making music on your own, that's our generation kind of thing. You're in your 30s, right? If I can ask.
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes people don't want to share their age. You don't have to. But I just turned 32, dude. So like I'm in that that realm.
Yeah.
I don't know how much younger I am than you, but like I feel you. I didn't grow up with social media. I'm a 90s kid. So it's like
me too. So again, it's like I remember, one buddy I have that we work a lot together, not just on, EDM stuff, but on, whatever. One, just for fun, and two, because we want to be producers and play stuff with artists of all styles. But, the process, we would just kind of hang out and we'd be working on our laptop speakers, or one of us would be in the headphones, or one of us would be on the monitors. And just through the process, I just remember so many times where you perk up and like stop the other person and say like, hey, wait, hang on, that one thing you just did.
yeah.
And okay, like shoot me those stems. And then suddenly I'd be off and running. And I think that's something that we've lost a little bit with COVID, because that whole like musician in a dark room, I think it works for some people, but when your instrument is a computer, it can just be so draining.
Yeah.
There's not a dark room. It's like a, lit studio with speakers and headphones and a mouse and a keyboard. It's not so inspiring as, sitting somewhere beautiful with a guitar or something like that.
Yeah. I love when I really think about it, talking with you reminds me of how spontaneous making music, just being creative in general, like with anything that is creative tends to be really spontaneous. I'm wondering, has there ever been a moment where you like set out, I know we kind of talked about it already, but I'm wondering, did you ever set out to like achieve a certain type of song and then you achieved it? Because it sounds like you were describing how almost always you start out with an idea, you tinker with it, and what comes out is completely opposite, but it sounds cool regardless. I'm wondering if the opposite has ever happened, where you started with an idea with a goal in mind, and then you ended it, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do.
No. I mean, but yes and no. I mean, I think sometimes I've gotten a little bit close. But again, if I'm starting an idea, almost always 2 hours later, I'm not working on that idea anymore. And then at the time at which I want to pull together a record or a project, I'm often going back and looking at the stuff that I've done and then pushing one thing forward, or grouping some things and pushing them forward. Because again, like I've never sat down and said, this is the kind of song I want to make, started it, and just carried that through all the way. One, I think that's an exhausting idea.
It is.
You got to break it up. And then two, I think you need a little bit of space from your ideas to at least be able to evaluate whether you want to carry it forward or whether there is something there. Because I think when you're producing, especially as a producer, which is different from a musician, you're listening to the song, one, so many times as you're making it, and two, it's such a detailed level. 3 hours into it, you kind of lost some of the ability to evaluate it. And you shouldn't be evaluating it while you're working on it, because that's going to kill your creativity.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess to answer your question, I mean, I've sat down, achieved a concept for a song or a sketch that I intended to set out and do. But again, like after a few hours, I think you got to walk away from it.
Yeah. Do you normally finish your songs, or a lot of the stuff that you're known for? Are those things that you finished in one sitting?
No.
Is that like a usual thing for you? Never?
No, I mean, I think I'll get something far enough that I know exactly that it can be finished and how I would finish it. And I feel super confident that it can be finished in a nice way. Because again, like that doesn't take that much time. Sometimes it's just a loop and I know exactly what the whole song is going to be like, because the crux of it or this element is so integral to it, or that's what makes the song special. And now it's just a sort of a puzzle of how do you take this idea and finish it out. Doing that is, yeah, in one sitting, that never happens, especially as you get further along, it gets more and more detailed and you get kind of diminishing returns in terms of how much
Mm,
you're improving the song, but
yeah.
somehow it takes like 100 times longer than the actual important part of like coming up with the idea.
Yeah, it always happens. It gets away from you. And in reality, the cliche is always the simplicity is the best thing ever. Kind of reminds me of film scoring a little bit, how the themes tend to be not easy, but they're like the simple parts of the idea. And then
Yep.
filling out the score with all the rest of the
100%.
instrumentation is the one that takes the longest time. I'm wondering, in your opinion, and I don't know what you think about this because everyone has a different opinion, but I see that there is this desire, and I don't know if I can say this about a lot of people, so I'm not going to say this is about everybody, but I see a pattern just because I'm what you would consider a professional observer. There is, I feel like this desire right now with a lot of different producers of different genres trying to break away from what you would consider, I don't know, stereotypically electronic and trying to branch off into other genres. And obviously, we can attribute this because of COVID. It's kind of encourages us to explore other things. But I'm wondering, in your opinion, is it difficult for someone who starts off in the electronic realm to transfer over to a more of a pop or other genres, and B, to be accepted, especially if you come from an electronic circle? I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I have no idea about the second part, be accepted, because I'm just not clued into scenes and fans and attitudes and stuff like that. I mean, as far as, is it difficult to do? I mean, I'm sure it's easier. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing. I think it's probably easier. People have amassed an audience of listeners, and they might not bring some along who are married to their prior sound or whatever. But for the most part, I think that producers have a like semi-flawed idea of what their audiences are like sometimes. They think, oh, if I make trap music and this is my trap music fans, and that's all those people listen to. But my theory and what I think is that most people listen to like a really wide range of music. And
Yeah.
that they're not going to, like, the people that are on Reddit or whatever that are going to get pissed off when you try to leave your genre. That's just the vocal minority, and probably they'll keep listening to music if they like that genre anyway. So I don't know. I just try not to think about that stuff too much, but I think overall it's a good thing. That to me, it represents that audiences in this day and age are more tolerant of like a variety of sounds, and they're not just hooked into one genre or one subgenre. And I think for me, like growing up, that's what's so different about music. I was into like Tool and like alternative rock and stuff like that. And that's all I listened to pretty much.
Yeah, that was part of your identity. You dressed like them. It was the music
Exactly.
listened to. Yeah.
And now it's like people, they listen to singles off albums, and, instead of like the same 10 artists on the radio or whatever, they have 100. And then there's algorithms feeding stuff up. And sometimes it can be super surprising. So yeah, I think that the tendency or inevitability for producers to kind of have that moment to break away from their genre or like branch out, even at the expense of some of their, fans or their self-esteem, is representative of like an audience and a listener base that's actually excited about variety and more open to different kinds of music.
I love that. And I do think it's a really good answer. That leads me to asking you, where do you want, or I guess you can argue, where do you currently see that you're at in terms of your career, and where ideally do you want to go with it? I mean, it's a very broad question. Not everybody wants to have an answer for it, but in your opinion, what do you think about your own stuff in that realm?
I wish I had a better answer for you. And it's been something that I've been thinking about more and more. Because I'm not totally sure. I think, when I started out, I was looking around for examples of other people that had achieved kind of like that next step. They were playing shows, they had an income from, royalties or whatever, and they were achieving kind of this artist job that I wanted. And so I would, kind of learn about what that looked like and how they made that possible. And that was kind of my next step. At this point, I'm not sure what that next step looks like. I mean, there's going back to touring and playing shows and kind of doing what I've already been doing. But for some reason, that doesn't feel like that's what I should be doing. It seems like I should be branching out more or evolving myself as a producer in some new way. And maybe, again, maybe that's just courtesy of like the last year of being shut in my house and feeling all angsty because of COVID, and that'll just go away as life gets back to normal. But I'm not sure. I definitely know that something that's always gotten me more excited is producing across genres for other artists. And that is something that I was, getting more and more opportunities to do behind the scenes before COVID started. Going down to LA a bunch, getting in studios and rooms with musicians and bands and stuff like that. And that was super fun and exciting. And then COVID hit and that kind of closed the door on a lot of that.
Yeah.
So maybe it's that, but I don't know. We'll see.
Interesting. Do you see that as a trend coming up in terms of electronic music? I do see a lot of interest in like actual live music and stuff like that. I don't know.
I mean, ironically, if that's a trend, it's just going back to what producers originally were.
Exactly.
With all those people. So I don't know. I mean, for a lot of people, I think they developed EDM chops and DJing chops and have not actually developed the ability to bring out the best song and music from someone else outside of their comfort zone. So I don't know if it's a trend. If someone can do it though, then they can do it. And that's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you are currently where you're at, because it does seem like the fact that you're thinking about, I don't really know where I want my stuff to go, is a good thing, because it speaks to your personality. It seems like you're somebody who, when given a canvas, you grab the paint, you kind of toss it on there and you start painting, but you don't really know what's going to come out.
Yeah.
Kind of, it seems like that's how your life kind of works, but it works out in a good way. You kind of trust it.
It kind of
is cool.
Yeah. And it's stressful to think that way. I'm not religious. I mean, it sounds like a very faith-based way of approaching music or my career, but yeah, I think I've done it. I've gotten in the position of feeling freaked out about not knowing what's coming up or whether this is going to last, and then something coming up and pushing through, or some new opportunity arises, or things just work out. I think I've gone through that cycle enough times, at least, to just be okay with not totally knowing what's next. And if it's all going to work out, and then just, again, like repeating to myself, well, it's always kind of figured itself out. So I think that'll happen again.
And that's a really good spot to kind of like start leaving things off, because I do think you're very
hopeful. That in your 30s,
You not everybody. You'd be surprised.
Not everybody, but it definitely
you used to get it by default, but nowadays it's a little bit different. But I mean, Zach, I do appreciate you being open and honest. I think when it comes to these conversations, the goal is always to inspire other people who want to be in your position, or who, I don't know, maybe find themselves in a rut. You'd be surprised how much just hearing people talk, it helps them. So to end things off, Zach, I just want to know a little bit about some of the stuff that you've got going on. We've been talking about it, but I'm wondering, maybe you can give me a name of some of the tracks you've got going on. If you have any performances, maybe some like secrets or hints that we can know of some other collabs that you've got going on. That would be great.
I've got a couple self-released LPs that I put together, and I just need to get back in the studio and finish them up. And, we were talking about, I think, going back to having fun. And these are two LPs I really just pulled tracks and demos together that were based on like an old sound, I guess, of mine, an old trap sound and an old future bass sounds. Even though it's definitely sounds, a lot newer in terms of production quality. And I just wanted to put those out for fun and real casually and quickly. Cause it just seems like a fun time to just
do that.
Harken back to like the old SoundCloud days of releasing. Beyond that, I've got another kind of side project, which is actually sort of like a live band that I've been working on, but it's very 80s pop. And
oh, nice.
I'm not totally sure if that's going to be anonymous or not, but definitely I'm going to get some Reddit hate for that.
Like synthwave? You're talking about like a little bit of synthwave in there?
Exactly. I don't know. I don't really know genres that well, but yeah, synthwave, that sounds right. I mean, other than that, I don't know. Like I said, we'll see. Stuff will come up.
And that's honestly probably a really good place to be in. Just
Yeah.
create, just see what happens, and somehow it works out. I do believe in that firmly. And I got to say thank you, Zach, for being on the show. It's been really cool getting a chance to pick your brain and to see where you go. I think you're going to be very, very successful. I mean, more successful than you currently are now. And you already are in a really good place. So I like your attitude, and I think you won't need much luck. You know, you're gonna be fine no matter
Yeah,
what.
we'll see. And if not, then, you know, go back to tech.
You can come back to me and blame me. It was my fault.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. I appreciate your time, man. It's
All
been
right.
good.
Thank you, man. You take care.